Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. J.K. Rowling's novels are true gems of modern literature, and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is widely considered one of the best books in the entire saga. But even the greatest authors can make mistakes. Today, we'll take a look at the oddities, inconsistencies, and plot holes left behind by the author in the third book. We'll also explore some lingering questions that continue to puzzle fans of the wizarding world. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Lupin and the Full Moon. Timeline discrepancy on the train. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione first see Professor Lupin, he is peacefully sleeping in a compartment on the Hogwarts Express. Later, he protects the students by fending off a Dementor that entered the train. The issue lies in the date. This all happens on September 1st, 1993. However, if we check astronomical data, we find that this date coincided with a full moon. In other words, Lupin should have been in werewolf form and incapable of travelling calmly on a train in human form. He should have either been locked away or under the effects of the Wolfsbane potion. The book says nothing about either, as serious oversight or just a minor slip. Number 2. Harry and the Dementors. Why only him? Lupin tells Harry that Dementors affect him more severely because he has experienced greater trauma, namely the death of his parents, unlike the other students. A touching explanation, but not very convincing. Take Neville Longbottom, for instance. His parents were tortured into insanity by Death Eaters. He remembers them, vaguely, but still. So why don't Dementors affect him in the same way? What about adult wizards who've lost loved ones or suffered horrors? According to Lupin's logic, many of them should collapse like Harry does. And yet Harry's reaction is treated as uniquely extreme. What's the truth? Number 3. Hermione and the Cheering Charms. Hermione is distressed about missing the class where cheering charms were taught and wants to consult Professor Flitwick. But she has the Time Turner. The magical artifact allows her to go back several hours, and she's used it multiple times before. So why didn't she go back to attend that class? One might assume she feared time overlaps or had reached a limit, but the book never mentions such restrictions. It feels as if the author simply forgot the Time Turner existed, or hoped the readers would. Number 4. Mr. Weasley gets the forest wrong. In a conversation overheard by Harry, Arthur Weasley tells Molly that both Ron and Harry have been in the Forbidden Forest twice. That's true, in the movies, but not in the books. In the first book, Ron never enters the forest with Harry, Hermione, and Draco. Neville replaces him. So Ron's only trip to the forest occurs in Prisoner of Azkaban, when he goes with Hagrid. A clear factual error, especially odd coming from someone as precise as Arthur Weasley. Number 5. Trelawney's Prophecy, a calendar problem. During divination class, Trelawney tells Lavender Brown that the worst will happen to her on Friday, November 16th. And sure enough, Lavender soon learns her rabbit has died. But there's one small problem. In 1993, November 16th was a Tuesday, not a Friday. Worse still, the rabbit's death is mentioned on October 16th, which was a Saturday. It may seem like a minor calendar slip, but in a world where prophecies are meant to be taken seriously, this feels sloppy. Number 6. OWL results in the Weasley twins. Too soon. On the train ride home at the end of the school year, the Weasley twins announce that they barely passed their exams, but in Half-Blood Prince, it's clearly stated that OWL results don't arrive until the end of the summer, in July or August. Assuming later canon holds true, Fred and George found out their results way too early. A small detail, perhaps, but one that shows the author sometimes contradicted her own timeline. Number 7. Buckbeak, Tree or Fence. When Harry and Hermione travel back in time, they save Buckbeak. In the original timeline, they see him tied to a tree, but after time travel, they free him from a fence. Quote, before the time jump, he saw Buckbeak tethered to a tree beyond the pumpkin patch. Quote, after, Harry quickly untied the rope that bound Buckbeak to the fence. This doesn't affect the plot, but attentive readers do notice these inconsistencies. Number 8. The expanding night bus. The night bus came roaring out of the darkness, lamps blazing, brakes screaming. Harry stumbled aboard and found himself surrounded by swinging lamps, brass bedsteads, and a conductor named Stan Shunpike. "Take it away, Ern!" Stan shouted, and the bus shot forward, squeezing between two parked cars so tightly that it slimmed itself like a blade of light. But nothing inside moved. The beds didn't bend, the chandelier didn't rattle, the interior remained untouched by the chaos outside. It made no sense. If the outside of the bus compressed to the width of a lamppost, where did the furniture go? Magic? Yes. But even magic usually follows some logic in Rowling's world. Extension charms are well established, but compression charms that protect all inner objects while altering only the outer frame? Unheard of. Not even Hermione, who later carries a tent in her handbag, mentions such a thing. The night bus is never explained. It simply is a Rowling contradiction that defies space, physics, and, apparently, basic magical law. Number 9. The Fat Lady's mysterious escape. The Fat Lady was gone. Her portrait slashed, her frame empty. She had vanished from the Gryffindor entrance after Sirius Black tried to force his way in. When Dumbledore arrived, he was told she had fled, hiding in another painting, refusing to return. "She's still too frightened to come back," said a teacher. The idea was simple. The portrait moved to escape danger. But it raised a strange question. How? Hogwarts portraits don't work like ghosts. They can move, yes, but only to other canvases they're magically linked to. Headmaster portraits, for example, can visit other frames within the headmaster's office. Others appear restricted to certain areas. Yet the Fat Lady drifted through the entire castle, hiding in paintings far from her usual place. No one explains how she managed it. No portrait before or after her shows that same freedom. If paintings could just flee at will, why haven't we seen others do the same? When Peeves caused chaos, when Death Eaters invaded, no other portrait abandoned its post, not the Slytherin dungeon guardians, not the wise figures on the 7th floor. Only the Fat Lady, that one time, broke the rule. Either she was given special privileges, or the rules of portrait magic changed just for her. And then, like the slashes on her canvas, the logic was quietly painted over. Number 10. The Marauder's Map and Missing Passages. The Marauder's Map was brilliant. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs are proud to present. It showed every hallway, every room, every secret passage, every soul walking the grounds of Hogwarts. Yet somehow it failed to reveal the biggest secret of all, the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. When the basilisk was slithering through the pipes when students were being attacked, the map remained silent. Not a single dot labelled Tom Riddle, not a single slither of warning. How could the creators of such a perfect map have missed an entire chamber buried beneath the school? And then there's Peter Pettigrew. His name should have been on the map every single day. He slept in the Gryffindor dormitory. He curled up in Ron's bed. He moved through the castle with the other students for years. Yet Fred and George Weasley, who owned the map before Harry, never noticed the name Peter beside their younger brother. Did they never look closely? Did the map glitch? Or did the twins just assume Pettigrew was some Hufflepuff friend with odd sleep habits? Even Dumbledore never uncovered these things. He knew the castle better than anyone. But the secret room, the hidden boy, the vanishing passageways, all slipped through his fingers. Perhaps the Marauder's Map wasn't as all-knowing as it seemed, or maybe, like the people who held it, it only saw what it wanted to see. Number 11. Disappearing Professors. The feast began. Candles floated above golden plates, and the sorting hat sang its usual song. But something felt different, not just in the darker tone of the year, with Dementors at the gates and whispers of Sirius Black in the corridors. Something was missing, or rather, someone. Professor Sinistra, the astronomy teacher who had attended the sorting feast in previous years, was gone. Not a single mention. No seat at the staff table, no lessons, no star charts. She had vanished without explanation, and she wasn't the only one. Hogwarts had always felt like a living place, where portraits talked, staircases moved, and professors had stories. But in The Prisoner of Azkaban, many familiar staff members simply disappeared. Professor Sprout barely speaks, Flitwick flickers in and out, Binns, the ghostly history of magic teacher, fades entirely. But strangest of all is the silence surrounding Quirinus Quirrell, the man who died with Voldemort in the very same castle. No one mentions him. Not a single professor recalls his death. Not even Dumbledore. Harry never reflects on the man who tried to kill him in his first year. There is no memorial, no reminder, no curiosity about the fact that Voldemort was once in the building wearing a turban. It's as if he never existed, yet the events of the Philosopher's Stone were huge. The entire school had been under threat. And now, 2 years later, it's forgotten. In a place where history hangs in every hallway, where paintings gossip and ghosts linger, the absence is loud. It feels unnatural. Maybe Rowling wanted to keep the focus on new characters, on Lupin and Sirius and the Marauder's legacy. But for readers who pay attention, it creates a strange echo. A school full of secrets shouldn't forget its past. Not when the past is still walking its halls. Number 12. Lupin forgets his potion. Snape stood rigid in the hospital wing, eyes blazing. "Perhaps he used Polyjuice potion," he said, voice sharp, every word laced with venom. He was speaking of Sirius Black, the escaped convict, the man everyone feared. In Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban, this theory sounds logical. After all, Polyjuice allows a wizard to take on another's form. But Snape, the potions master of Hogwarts, should have known better. Polyjuice potion lasts exactly 1 hour, no more. After that, the transformation fades. The drinker returns to their original body. Sirius would have had to brew and consume it constantly every 60 minutes without fail. And not just brew it, but do so under extreme conditions, on the run, in hiding, without ingredients or time. And still avoid being caught in the most heavily guarded school in Britain. It gets stranger. Snape, who taught Polyjuice theory to Hermione just 1 year earlier, knows how complex it is. In the Chamber of Secrets, it took her a month to brew it, even with a fully stocked supply cabinet. "It's the most complicated potion I've ever seen," she said. But now Snape suddenly believes Sirius could pull this off, alone, while dodging Dementors and auras. It feels more like paranoia than logic. Perhaps Snape wanted it to be true. Perhaps he was too blinded by old hatred to see the holes in his own reasoning. But from a narrative point of view, the theory collapses. Sirius didn't use Polyjuice. He was an animagus. And Snape, the one man who should have remembered that, forgot the rules of magic just long enough to make the wrong accusation. Number 13, Ghosts Who Know Nothing. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington floated silently through the corridors of Hogwarts. As the resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower, he had seen centuries of secrets and whispered more than a few himself. He watched over the common room, drifted past sleeping students, and passed through walls without resistance. He knew the castle better than any map, and yet, for all his translucent wisdom, he never once noticed that a man named Peter Pettigrew was hiding inside the body of a rat under his very nose. The Marauder's map showed it, clear as daylight. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, the map announced proudly, tracking every soul in the castle. And when Harry watched it, he saw it. There was Peter Pettigrew moving along the corridor. Not a rat, a man, a living, breathing man disguised in fur and whiskers. So how could nearly headless Nick, or any ghost, have missed that? He floated past Ron's bed every night. Did he never notice the animagus transformation? Ghosts are not bound by doors or walls. They drift where they please, invisible but ever present. If anyone could spy on hidden corners of Hogwarts, it was them. Yet none of them ever mentioned a second soul in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory. The Bloody Baron stalked the dungeons in silence. The fat friar roamed the Hufflepuff basement. The Grey Lady haunted the upper floors. And not one noticed that a known fugitive, presumed dead, was living among the students. Perhaps Rowling wanted to remind us, ghosts in Hogwarts are not guardians. They are echoes. They observe, but they do not intervene. Still, it's hard to believe that not a single one of them, especially Sir Nicholas, who once gave Harry advice about death itself, never felt a flicker of unease around Ron's pet, a pet that, on full moons, stood up and walked like a man. Number 14, invisibility cloak with a hole. Harry clutched the invisibility cloak tighter as he stepped into Professor Snape's office. The Marauder's map burned in his hand. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't even supposed to be in Hogsmeade. One wrong move and he could lose everything. But the office was empty and the risk felt worth it. Then, just as he turned to leave, the door opened. Snape walked in, sharp, silent, alert. Harry froze. He didn't breathe. He was completely covered. And yet somehow Snape stopped and stared directly at the spot where Harry stood. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, this moment is loaded with tension and confusion. The invisibility cloak is supposed to make its wearer completely undetectable. Dumbledore once said it was a true cloak of legend, woven from the hair of a thestral and impervious to most spells. And yet, when Snape enters the room, he doesn't just look around curiously, he knows. "There's someone here," he says, according to the book. "I can smell it." Smell, feel, sense. Suddenly the legendary cloak doesn't seem so legendary. It gets even stranger when Harry accidentally drops the Marauder's map. Snape picks it up, puzzled, and then, without seeing Harry, starts speaking to the parchment. But the map refuses to reveal anything. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs wish Professor Snape good day, it says, mockingly. At no point does Snape directly spot Harry, but his behaviour strongly implies he's aware of a presence. How? Was the cloak faulty? Did it leave Harry's shoes exposed? Was it magical instinct? Rowling never explains this scene, and it breaks the internal rules she built around the invisibility cloak. This isn't just any cloak, it's a deathly hallow. It's meant to be perfect. If someone like Snape, without any magical enhancements or tools, can sense the wearer so easily, it undermines the cloak's mythical power. Either the object isn't what we were told, or Rowling wrote this moment for the drama. A logic be damned. Number 15. Lupin skips his potion. And no one notices. In the darkened halls of Hogwarts, where magic intertwines with mystery and danger, some mistakes go unnoticed until they leave chaos in their wake. One such oversight lies buried deep in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and it involves a character beloved for his kindness and complexity, Professor Remus Lupin. Throughout Harry's third year, Lupin is the very model of control, wisdom, and responsibility. But in the pivotal night that brings Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and the full moon together, something shatters the illusion. The calm professor, who has diligently taken his wolfsbane potion all year, suddenly forgets, or neglects, to do so on the one night when it matters most. What's more troubling, no one notices. The wolfsbane potion is not a minor detail. It is a carefully constructed plot device introduced early in the book with a specific purpose. Severus Snape, ever resentful but duty-bound, brews it for Lupin under Dumbledore's orders. Lupin even thanks him for it, an act of grace considering their history. Readers are told that the potion, when taken properly in the days leading up to a full moon, allows a werewolf to retain his human mind during transformation. That's critical. Without it, Lupin becomes a danger to every living thing around him. The potion is a lifeline, not just for him, but for the entire school. And yet, on the fateful night when Sirius confronts Peter in the shrieking shack, Lupin transforms without warning, without preparation, and most importantly, without the potion in his system. The question that echoes through the minds of attentive readers is jarring in its simplicity. How could everyone forget? Lupin himself is an intelligent, meticulous man. He lives with the curse of lycanthropy every day. He has lived through years of isolation and self-loathing precisely because of what happens when he loses control. The notion that he would simply forget to take the potion on the night of the full moon stretches belief. Some might argue that Lupin's discovery of the Marauder's map and Peter's presence in the castle distracted him, but that only deepens the issue. A man who has lived in fear of his condition his entire life would not, under any circumstances, allow his mind to wander from the full moon. He would not risk endangering the very students he had grown to care for. He knows the schedule, he feels the pull, he prepares every month. The text offers no explanation, no internal conflict, not even a single line to suggest that he forgot. Instead, the transformation erupts without warning, with devastating consequences. Even more baffling is Dumbledore's role, or lack thereof. Albus Dumbledore is a character famed for his foresight, his ability to plan for the worst while hoping for the best. He knew Lupin was a werewolf when he hired him. He knew that Wolfsbane potion was necessary for safe transformations. Why then was there no system of checks and balances? Why wasn't someone, Snape, Pomfrey, McGonagall, assigned to ensure that Lupin took his potion on time? Hogwarts in that moment becomes a dangerously negligent institution, one that allows a known threat to roam free during a full moon. Severus Snape too behaves out of character. For a man so obsessed with rules, so bitter toward Lupin, and so acutely aware of the full moon's approach, his silence is deafening. He knows when the full moon rises. He knows Lupin is out of the castle, chasing Sirius Black. He has already voiced suspicions. Why doesn't he mention the potion? Why doesn't he bring it up with Dumbledore? Even if we accept that Snape is driven by a desire to expose Sirius and James's old friend, the risk of a werewolf loose in the castle would surely override even that hatred. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the werewolf transformation is treated as a sudden, chaotic accident, but it's an accident built on silence, on uncharacteristic forgetfulness that the book never addresses. J.K. Rowling, in crafting her intricate world, paid immense attention to cause and effect. So many elements in the series are constructed like a puzzle, every piece falling into place, but here the pieces simply vanish. "This time tomorrow the moon will be full," Lupin tells Harry, Hermione and Ron, mere pages before the transformation. He knows, he states it aloud, and still he doesn't drink the potion. The quote exists, clear as day, and it only heightens the implausibility. The result is catastrophe. Lupin transforms into a werewolf. He attacks Sirius. He threatens Harry and Hermione. His secret is nearly exposed to the entire school. And the worst part, this entire chain of events hinges on something that never should have happened. One missed dose of potion, one overlooked full moon, one catastrophic lapse in logic. The brilliance of the series is built on its internal consistency. When a rule is established, it matters. The time turner has limits. Magic has boundaries. But this moment in the shrieking shack feels like the rules are bent to serve the plot rather than the world. No character ever addresses the oversight. The next morning, Lupin resigns, not because of the missed potion, but because Snape reveals his secret. No mention is made of how dangerous the night had become. No apologies, no explanation, no reflection. It's as if the story brushes the moment aside, hoping readers won't ask why the potion was never consumed. But fans do ask, they notice, they reread, and the silence left in the wake of the transformation is louder than any howl. Number 16, Time Turner. Why only Hermione? In her third year at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger carried around the most powerful object ever entrusted to a student, the time turner. A delicate hourglass on a chain, small enough to wear around the neck, it had the power to send its user back in time. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, this miraculous device was introduced casually, with the justification that Hermione needed it to attend multiple classes scheduled at the same time. It was Professor McGonagall who arranged this, having acquired special permission from the Ministry of Magic. The logic behind this was simple. Hermione, being a brilliant student, wanted to learn more. Yet the very simplicity of this justification is what makes the time turner one of the most questionable narrative devices in the entire Harry Potter series. To grasp the full absurdity of this, one must understand what the time turner truly represented. This wasn't just about repeating a school day or sneaking in extra homework hours. The time turner granted the user the ability to change the past. The book even shows Hermione and Harry using it to save 2 lives, Buckbeak the Hippogriff and Sirius Black. As Dumbledore advised them cryptically, "You must not be seen." The implications are massive. They didn't just observe past events, they altered them. They prevented an execution and a wrongful imprisonment. And they did it with something handed to a 13-year-old girl for the sake of academic excellence. What immediately strikes the thoughtful reader is the sheer recklessness of the Ministry's decision. The same Ministry that later spent years denying Voldemort's return and arresting innocent people thought it was perfectly acceptable to hand a device that could unravel time itself to a young student. Even Professor McGonagall, known for her strictness and adherence to rules, facilitated this. It's almost laughable that an organization so bogged down by red tape and bureaucracy would not only allow this but practically endorse it. The Ministry, as portrayed throughout the books, is obsessed with control, so why relinquish this much power? The real problem isn't the time turner itself. It's what its existence does to the rest of the story. If one device could undo a wrongful execution, why not use it again? Why not go back and stop Voldemort from ever rising? Why not save Cedric Diggory after his senseless murder in the graveyard? Why not return moments before the Battle of the Department of Mysteries and stop Sirius from walking into his own death? The only limitation ever mentioned is that one must not be seen and that travelling too far back can be dangerous. But the precedent has already been set. Small, controlled interventions do work. The book proves it. After all, Hermione and Harry succeed without breaking the world. They make noise, throw rocks, save a creature, lure a werewolf away, and even ride Buckbeak. They interfere enough to completely change the timeline, and yet the universe doesn't collapse. Nothing falls apart. Time doesn't rebel. This undermines every death that follows in the series. The very idea that magic can undo the finality of death, that a teenager could wield such magic, makes every subsequent tragedy feel like a choice rather than a consequence. The reader is left with one burning question: why was the time turner used only once? The issue becomes even more glaring when we consider Dumbledore's role. Known for orchestrating events from behind the scenes, Dumbledore is wise, powerful, and deeply aware of the dangers of magic. He gives Harry and Hermione just enough instruction to nudge them toward using the time turner, but never reveals how he came to trust 2 students with such responsibility. Was he testing them? Was he limited by the Ministry? The book never tells us. Instead, readers are expected to accept that the headmaster of Hogwarts found no other moment in his long career where changing the past might have saved more lives or turned the tide of war. In fact, it's not just Dumbledore's silence that raises eyebrows. The entire wizarding world seems to forget the time turner exists after Prisoner of Azkaban. By the time Cedric Diggory dies in Goblet of Fire, there's no mention of it. Harry cradles his lifeless body broken by Voldemort's return, and no adult wizard even considers the possibility of going back a few hours. The Ministry, which once saw fit to use a time turner for school logistics, now accepts the finality of death without a word. Why? It becomes harder to ignore when Sirius Black dies in Order of the Phoenix. Harry is devastated. He screams, he fights to get through the veil. Dumbledore's expression is one of deep regret. But still no one brings up the time turner. This, after all, is the same man they once saved with it. They know it works. They've done it before. And yet no one even whispers about trying again. The magical device that could reverse death is treated like a one-time loophole rather than a reality within the magical world. Rowling herself seemed aware of the danger she had introduced. In the Order of the Phoenix, she writes that all the time-turners in the Ministry were destroyed during the climactic battle. This feels less like a plot development and more like damage control. By eliminating the devices, she attempts to restore the weight of consequence to her world. But the damage has already been done. Readers can't unsee what was possible. They can't unknow that time travel was once not only real, but accessible, legal, and used successfully by children. Number 17, Sirius's appearance in Azkaban. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius Black is introduced to the reader as a terrifying escaped convict, the first to ever break out of the dreaded Azkaban prison. He is portrayed as dangerous, unstable, and deeply menacing. The Ministry's description of him and the image on the wanted posters, gaunt face, long matted hair, and wild, haunted eyes, paint the picture of a man ravaged by madness. However, something in this portrayal does not fully align with the internal logic of the wizarding world that J.K. Rowling so carefully constructed. One of the most glaring inconsistencies involves Sirius's escape and appearance. If prisoners of Azkaban are stripped of their possessions and placed in standard prison uniforms, how does Sirius manage to obtain his old robes? He is later seen in what is described as a long, dark cloak, not the ragged garments expected from someone who spent 12 years in a fortress guarded by soul-sucking demons. The narrative skips over the moment he supposedly finds or acquires these clothes, and readers are left to assume he simply had them. But where did he get them? From whom? And why did no one stop a cloaked man wandering near Hogsmeade and the Forbidden Forest? Sirius's transformation into a dog is another point that raises questions not fully answered in the book. It's mentioned that he used his animagus form to escape, evading the Dementors because they could not properly sense animals. This raises a serious concern. If the Dementors are unable to recognize or distinguish animagi, does this not create a catastrophic flaw in the entire security of Azkaban? The prison is supposedly impenetrable and escape-proof, yet it seems any skilled wizard who can become an animal has a free pass to walk out the door. The idea that the Ministry never considered this loophole or failed to implement any magical countermeasures against animagi undermines the credibility of Azkaban's supposed strength. Animagi are rare, yes, but the fact that Sirius, James Potter, and Peter Pettigrew all became animagi as teenagers suggests it's far from impossible. The logistics of Sirius's time in prison are equally murky. The Dementors drain hope and happiness, leaving prisoners in a state of despair. Yet Sirius maintains his sanity. He claims in the book, "I was innocent, and that kept me sane." But even Dumbledore states that the Dementors do not care whether their victims are guilty or innocent. They don't need walls and water to keep the prisoners in, not when they're trapped inside their own heads, incapable of a single cheerful thought. So how exactly did Sirius avoid complete mental collapse? The explanation offered, that transforming into a dog allowed him to feel less of the Dementor's emotional assault, is intriguing but not sufficient. If it was that effective, why wasn't animagus transformation used more widely as a defense? If becoming an animal renders the Dementors almost useless, then why was Azkaban still operating under their watch? More puzzling is how Sirius is able to retain such precise cognitive function after 12 years of imprisonment. Upon his escape, he not only navigates across the country undetected, he develops a complex plan involving Hogwarts, observes Harry in secret, and even manages to get into the Gryffindor dormitory with a knife. This is a man who's been deprived of normal human interaction for over a decade, tormented daily by creatures designed to destroy the mind. And yet he is more coherent and focused than many free. Wizards. It strains belief that someone so long confined and mentally assaulted could leap straight into espionage and survive on the run. Even Harry, upon seeing him, is startled not just by his appearance, but by his calculated actions. Furthermore, Sirius manages to break into Hogwarts, a school protected by charms, teachers, and magical creatures. He sneaks past the Dementors stationed around the castle. He gets into the castle. He gets into Gryffindor Tower. How? Rowling never elaborates. The Marauder's map shows people's names and locations, and it's said to be foolproof, yet no one detects a large dog sneaking about. Even Crookshanks seems to understand Sirius's true form more clearly than most trained adults. The cat helps Sirius, but it begs the question, how can a magical cat sense what auras and teachers cannot? The inconsistency is not just magical, but practical. Sirius's presence near Hogsmeade also goes largely unchecked. He's a wanted man, his face on every wall of the wizarding world, yet no one spots him. If his animagus form is so effective a disguise, then again, why doesn't the Ministry assume more criminals might use this method? The absurdity deepens when we consider that Peter Pettigrew, also an animagus, managed to live undetected for years. That's 2 criminals out of Azkaban's watch, both animagi, both invisible to magical detection, and both directly linked to the same case. It appears that a simple rat and a dog can beat the most feared magical security systems. That doesn't make the Ministry seem lax. It makes them look profoundly incompetent. Let's not forget the photograph on the Azkaban wanted poster. Sirius is shown snarling, his hair wild, mouth agape like a deranged beast. But if he spent most of his time in dog form as implied, wouldn't his human appearance be less gaunt, less haunted? He implies he only returned to human form to keep his thoughts organized. The Dementors couldn't see me as a dog, he tells Harry. If that's the case, then the prison guards should never have seen him in human form long enough to capture such an expressive photo. Who took it? When? And why was he allowed to behave like that on camera? Are prisoners given photo shoots before they flee? Or did the Ministry stage it? Number 18, the final Patronus scene, cheat-level magic. In the heart of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, J.K. Rowling crafts a thrilling climax where time travel, Dementors, and a powerful Patronus converge in one of the most iconic moments of the entire series. As Harry and Hermione venture back in time to rescue both Buckbeak and Sirius Black, they witness the scene by the lake where Harry had earlier been nearly consumed by Dementors. It's a pivotal event that marks a significant turning point for Harry's magical abilities, but upon closer inspection, the logic of this scene begins to waver beneath the weight of its own narrative ambition. For all its emotional intensity and cinematic grandeur, the moment where Harry casts his stag Patronus to save his past self is also, arguably, one of the biggest narrative loopholes Rowling let slip through the cracks. Harry, standing behind the trees with Hermione in hiding, watches in horror as Dementors close in on his unconscious double. He remembers how, in that moment earlier in the day, he saw what he believed was the silhouette of his father across the lake, casting the Patronus that drove the Dementors away. But this time, as the moment repeats itself, he realizes no one is coming. It dawns on him that there is no mysterious figure, there is only him. Somehow, this realization alone gives him the confidence to step forward and cast the Expecto Patronum charm at a level of mastery that he had never previously reached. And this is where the logic begins to unravel. Up until this point in the book, Harry had struggled significantly with conjuring a Patronus. During Lupin's lessons, his best efforts had resulted in only a silver mist, an incomplete and unstable form of the spell. Even during his lessons with a boggart Dementor, Harry could barely produce enough magical force to repel the illusion. The idea that he could suddenly summon a fully corporeal stag, one strong enough to drive away dozens of real dementors, strains the boundaries of narrative credibility. There is a vast difference between practice and mastery, and Rowling leaps over that chasm in a single moment without truly earning it. The narrative justification hinges on Harry believing he had seen his father earlier that night. That belief becomes a form of emotional fuel. He explains to Hermione afterward, "I knew I could do it this time because I'd already done it. Does that make sense?" But it doesn't, not entirely, because he only does it the first time because he thinks someone else did it for him. It is only in the second loop that he realizes it must have been him. The logic folds in on itself, forming a perfect but paradoxical time loop. He casts the Patronus because he had seen the Patronus. But the only reason he saw the Patronus is because he would go on to cast it. It is a closed circle with no origin. This kind of time loop, while visually and emotionally compelling, undermines the very essence of cause and effect. The magical act, the powerful Patronus, comes not from growth or earned confidence, but from the knowledge that it must have already happened. There is no genuine development, only a recursive loop of necessity. In essence, the spell is not cast out of learned skill or emotional resilience, but because the timeline demands it. Magic becomes a script to follow, not a power to master. It becomes more problematic when one considers the rules Rowling had already established. Time travel in the Potterverse, particularly through the Time Turner, is bound by strict limitations. The past cannot be changed. Everything must play out exactly as it did. So how could Harry expect to succeed in casting the Patronus if, by the logic of the moment, he hadn't yet learned to cast it? It's not just a question of confidence. It's a question of capability. He had never performed this level of magic before. Why should he believe he could do it now? The leap Harry makes from struggling student to magical prodigy comes without the necessary stepping stones. It's not the emotional high that's troubling, but the mechanical shortcut the plot takes. A story builds trust with its readers by respecting its own internal logic. In this case, the moment may be emotionally satisfying, but it asks the reader to ignore the magical rules established just chapters earlier. Rowling's writing usually excels in layering complex magical systems with emotional stakes, but here she bypasses the system for the sake of the emotional payoff. Furthermore, the Patronus is not just any spell. It is notoriously difficult, requiring both magical strength and deep emotional clarity. Lupin himself had warned Harry that very few wizards his age could even manage a wispy version of it, and yet Harry not only produces a full Patronus, but commands it to sweep away a horde of dementors, creatures that even adult wizards fear to confront. It's as if Harry skips several levels of magical progression simply because the plot requires it. This issue is made more glaring by the fact that Harry himself is confused about how he managed it. The book tells us he raised his head, the Patronus was his, it wasn't his father. He had seen himself conjuring the Patronus before it had actually happened. But this realization comes with no deeper explanation. There is no sudden internal breakthrough, no moment of clarity that justifies this leap in magical ability. Instead, it's treated as a revelation that, once acknowledged, magically unlocks new powers like a cheat code in a video game. It's not learning, it's recognition. It would be one thing if Harry had shown signs of this power gradually developing, or if there had been a build-up to this breakthrough. But Rowling accelerates his arc at warp speed. One could argue that love, determination, and the desperation to save Sirius drove him to such heights. But even then, emotion alone has never been enough to execute such high-level magic. The books repeatedly emphasize the importance of training, focus, and intent. This scene contradicts that ethos. Additionally, this creates a troubling precedent within the magical system. If time loops can create knowledge or abilities from nothing, where the only requirement is that someone in the future will perform them, then magic itself begins to lose its grounding. It becomes circular rather than linear, a series of self-fulfilling events with no real origin. Magic stops being a process and starts being a narrative convenience. It's not uncommon for stories involving time travel to encounter these kinds of paradoxes, but in the tightly controlled world of Hogwarts, where spells are governed by rigorous learning and years of study, this leap stands out as particularly jarring. Rowling had built a world with clear rules where skill must be earned. The time-turner sequence violates that consistency. It introduces an outcome that seems unearned, even if it feels emotionally resonant. Perhaps Rowling intended this to be a metaphorical moment, where Harry connects with his father's memory, finds inner strength, and steps into his own legacy. And as symbolism it works beautifully, but as a narrative mechanic within a structured magical universe, it falters. The moment asks us to believe in the impossible, not through magic, but through a story structure that breaks its own logic. Even the emotional payoff becomes less effective when scrutinized. Harry believes his father has returned. That hope drives his belief. But when the illusion shatters and he sees himself as the source, the triumph should be in the realization of self-worth and power. Instead, it becomes a strange case of accidental greatness. He did it because he saw himself do it. The emotion is real, but the magic is hollow. This isn't to say the scene lacks power. Visually and emotionally, it's one of the most memorable in the series. The image of the stag leaping across the lake, driving away the darkness, is etched into the memory of every fan. But when the narrative logic collapses under scrutiny, it diminishes the weight of that memory. A beautiful illusion? Yes, but perhaps one held together by sleight of hand more than substance. In a series that has enchanted millions through its consistency, world-building, and emotional depth, this moment remains an outlier. It's a rare example where Rowling's storytelling brilliance leaned too heavily on emotion and not enough on the internal logic she so carefully constructed. It's not that Harry shouldn't have succeeded, it's that the story didn't do the work to get him there. Number 19, Hogsmeade, with permission only, or just wing it? In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, one of the most emotionally charged moments for Harry comes when Professor McGonagall refuses to sign his permission form for Hogsmeade visits. "I'm sorry, Potter," she says, "but I'm not your guardian." This line marks a sharp emotional boundary between Harry and the normal teenage experience shared by his peers. As his classmates chatter excitedly about sweets at Honeyduke's and pranks at Zonko's, Harry is once again left watching from the outside. The permission form becomes a symbol of his orphaned status and the adult world's refusal to make room for him. But what begins as a powerful emotional beat in the story soon unravels into a structural inconsistency that raises serious questions. If the rules are so strict, why is enforcement so lax? Is Hogsmeade truly off-limits to unauthorized students, or is it simply another Hogwarts illusion, rules when it's convenient and chaos when it's not? Fred and George Weasley, two of the school's most notorious mischief makers, provide the key to unlocking this riddle. They hand Harry the Marauder's map, a magical document that reveals every corridor, passageway, and living soul within Hogwarts and its surroundings. On it are 7 secret passages leading out of the school. Filch knows about 4 of them, Fred mentions, but we reckon he doesn't know about this one. The one they refer to, the passage hidden behind the statue of the one-eyed witch, leads directly into the basement of Honeyduke's. This is how Harry enters Hogsmeade without a permission slip and without anyone stopping him. He simply disappears through a tunnel. What's astonishing here is not the map's existence or the boy's use of it. Those are expected given the tone and universe of the series. What's shocking is the absolute absence of adult oversight. There's no magical barrier at Hogsmeade. No teacher is seen monitoring the village entrances. No roll call is mentioned. There are no guards posted, despite the fact that Sirius Black is supposedly a mass murderer roaming free. The risk isn't just theoretical. McGonagall and Dumbledore are both convinced. that Black may try to enter Hogwarts to find Harry, and yet Harry is able to sneak out of the school and wander around Hogsmeade undetected. Not once, multiple times. This brings us to a deeper inconsistency. If Harry could enter Hogsmeade so easily, who else could? What's stopping first or second-year students from sneaking into the village? If Fred and George, who are only fifth years, know about secret passages and have enough knowledge to build enchanted objects like extendable ears, wouldn't the Hogwarts staff be at least mildly suspicious that students might break the rules? The Marauders map was created by James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew during their own school years. This means the existence of secret tunnels has been part of Hogwarts for decades. Has no teacher ever considered sealing them? The narrative gives no sign that teachers conduct any routine patrols of the Hogsmeade border. In fact, it seems the village is more or less operating on the honour system. This would be questionable even in times of peace, but in Prisoner of Azkaban the magical world is under direct threat. Dementors patrol the school grounds, auras are on alert, the Ministry is nervous, and yet a 13-year-old boy sneaks into a public village multiple times and no one notices. The reader is asked to believe that the Ministry sends soul-sucking Dementors to guard Hogwarts but forgets to post a basic checkpoint outside the only student-accessible village nearby. Even more puzzling is the attitude of the teachers. Remus Lupin, a former marauder himself, never raises an eyebrow when Harry demonstrates oddly specific knowledge about Hogwarts passages. Severus Snape, ever suspicious of Harry, never considers that the boy might have left the school grounds illegally. McGonagall, who denies Harry the permission slip, never follows up to ensure he complies. It's as if the very idea of checking the rules' enforcement doesn't cross their minds, which feels wildly out of character, especially for someone like McGonagall, who has always been strict about the letter of the law. The problem becomes even clearer when one recalls how Hogwarts handled other rule-breaking. In the Philosopher's Stone, students caught out of bed face detention in the Forbidden Forest, a location so dangerous it's absurd to send children there. In the Chamber of Secrets, students are practically locked inside the castle for fear of the monster lurking in the walls. But in Prisoner of Azkaban, despite the alleged threat of a mass murderer, students are allowed to roam the halls, sneak out of the castle, and enter an unguarded village. The inconsistency isn't subtle, it's glaring. From a narrative standpoint, Rowling appears to use the Hogsmeade permission slip as a symbol of exclusion rather than a functional policy. The rule is there only to make Harry feel isolated, not to create a believable system. Once the emotional beat has served its purpose, the rule is quietly discarded. The reader never sees another student stopped at the Hogsmeade entrance. The rule never causes complications for anyone else. By the end of the book, even the magical map and invisibility cloak are used freely, suggesting that the barriers were never meant to be real. It's not just a plot hole, it's a thematic contradiction. One of the core messages of Prisoner of Azkaban is the importance of trust and security. Harry is told repeatedly that he must be careful, that he's in danger, that adults are watching over him. But the very fabric of the narrative contradicts that. Harry is not being watched. The adults are not in control. The systems meant to protect him are paper thin. He walks through them with ease, and if the world is so full of danger, then why does no one notice? It's worth asking, what would have happened if things had gone wrong? What if Harry had run into Sirius Black in the tunnels? What if he had been injured or kidnapped in Hogsmeade, where no teacher was monitoring his movements? The consequences would have been catastrophic, and yet the story never even allows that possibility. The lack of consequence creates a strange friction between the world's supposed rules and the way it actually functions. Some might argue that the Marauder's map is a once-in-a-generation magical object capable of subverting any rule, but that doesn't explain why the entrance to Honeydukes is left unguarded, nor does it explain why students are never checked upon entering Hogsmeade. If a rule can be broken so easily and without consequence, Then it stops being a rule at all. It becomes a narrative device, a temporary obstacle designed to evoke sympathy or tension, then tossed aside when it no longer serves that function. This wouldn't be so jarring if Hogwarts hadn't already established its capacity for surveillance and discipline. The school has enchanted staircases that move unpredictably, talking portraits who can snitch, ghosts who roam the halls, and house elves who maintain the castle. Filch, the caretaker, has an encyclopedic knowledge of student behavior and an ever-present scowl, and yet not a single one of these sentient beings ever mentions Harry's repeated, unauthorized trips outside the school grounds. It's not just a blind spot, it's a black hole of logic. Fred and George's role in this loophole makes things even more absurd. Not only do they give Harry the Marauder's map, but they also know about the tunnels and how to use them. They had apparently used them before. If two students are this well versed in evading school rules, then either the rules are meaningless or the staff is hopelessly incompetent. The Weasley twins have always been portrayed as brilliant but underachieving pranksters, yet their knowledge of Hogwarts infrastructure surpasses that of the entire adult staff. That raises an even more troubling question: do the adults choose to look away? Perhaps the most bizarre part of all this is that Harry, for all his moral integrity, doesn't question it either. He feels guilty about sneaking out, yes, but not because the rule itself makes sense. He breaks it because he feels entitled to join his classmates. He has no respect for the permission system, and the narrative rewards him for that. He gets to enjoy Hogsmeade, experience adventure, and avoid punishment. In doing so, Rowling unintentionally communicates that some rules are meant to be ignored if you're clever enough. The lesson here isn't one of caution or safety, it's one of subversion. In the end, the question isn't whether Harry should have needed a permission slip. The real issue is that the world around him doesn't behave as though that slip matters. McGonagall's refusal, framed as firm and protective, becomes hollow when weighed against the school's utter indifference to what happens next. It's a rule made of smoke. The moment it's tested, it vanishes. And that's the heart of the inconsistency. Not just that Harry breaks the rules, but that no one ever really cared in the first place. Number 20, the Marauder's Map, says nothing. The Marauder's Map was a miracle of magical craftsmanship, a parchment so powerful and precise it could track every living soul inside Hogwarts. Created by Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Sirius Black, and James Potter during their school years, the map was capable of identifying animagi, ghosts, and even those hidden under invisibility cloaks. When Fred and George Weasley handed it over to Harry in The Prisoner of Azkaban, they casually passed on a legacy of mischievous genius. But buried beneath that charm, the map carried a flaw so staggering that it raises troubling questions, not just about Hogwarts' magical mechanics, but about the storytelling itself. At the heart of it all lies one haunting oversight. Peter Pettigrew's presence on the map went completely unnoticed by Harry, even though the traitor was living inside his school bag for most of the year. When Professor Lupin first confiscates the map in The Prisoner of Azkaban, he understands immediately what it is. "I know it because I was one of the 4 who made it," he later tells Harry. This admission confirms what the reader has suspected. The map is foolproof. It shows not only every person's name, but their exact location, regardless of their magical disguise. This includes animagi, a detail of critical importance considering that Peter Pettigrew, thought to be dead for over a decade, is secretly alive in the form of a rat. That rat, Scabbers, is Ron Weasley's pet, carried in and out of Gryffindor Tower, the Great Hall, Hagrid's hut, and, crucially, Harry's own belongings. The map should have screamed that a presumed dead Death Eater was nestled beside them every day, but it remained utterly silent. The contradiction becomes more jarring when we remember that Harry did see the name Peter Pettigrew on the map at one point. It happens during a late-night stroll through the corridors under his invisibility cloak. Intrigued by a dot labelled Peter Pettigrew wandering the castle, Harry is baffled. How could someone long thought murdered be alive and walking the halls? Yet instead of pursuing the mystery or confronting a teacher, Harry shrugs it off. The map tells the truth. It cannot lie. That moment alone should have set off a chain of alarm bells. Yet the story moves forward as if nothing happened. Even more puzzling is the map's lack of voice in more urgent moments. When Severus Snape catches Harry with the parchment and demands to know what it is, the map suddenly becomes sentient, insulting him with words like, "Mr. Mooney presents his compliments to Professor Snape and begs him to keep his abnormally large nose out of other people's business." It doesn't stop there. Messrs. Prongs, Padfoot, Mooney and Wormtail, it adds, each name revealing the identity of the creators. The map in this moment is not a passive tool. It has personality, sarcasm and voice. It speaks directly to the user. So why does this voice fall silent when it truly matters? It would have taken nothing for the map to say, "Beware, Peter Pettigrew is nearby." Or in the moment Harry glanced at his bag to see Scabbers wriggling inside, the map could have whispered, "Peter Pettigrew is in your rucksack." If it can insult a professor and display names with magical precision, it can certainly issue a warning. The silence is deafening. It feels less like an organic limitation of the artifact and more like a storytelling oversight, one that conveniently keeps the suspense alive until the climactic reveal in the shrieking shack. This oversight is made even more frustrating when Lupin later confesses that he knew Peter was alive. He saw the name Peter Pettigrew on the map himself and says, "I thought the map must be malfunctioning." The very creator of the map doubts its accuracy despite its proven reliability. If Lupin, of all people, trusts the map enough to navigate the castle but dismisses the appearance of his supposedly dead friend, then something is fundamentally broken, not in the map, but in the logic of the plot. Lupin should have known better. The map never lies. Another moment highlighting the map's power is when Harry sees Barty Crouch Jr. pretending to be Mad-Eye Moody in the Goblet of Fire. Later, it's revealed that the map could have exposed Crouch Jr. by name. "You mean this map shows everyone?" Harry asks. Lupin answers, "Everyone." So why does the map so inconsistently reveal information? It seems to have the intelligence to detect lies and the presence of hidden figures, but remains blind to one of the most dangerous threats in the school, the man who betrayed Harry's parents to Voldemort, hiding in plain sight. Peter Pettigrew's name was not only on the map, it was on it for months. The Marauders map tracks location, not activity, so it should have constantly displayed Peter Pettigrew in the Gryffindor dormitory. Surely someone would have noticed. Ron, Fred, George, any of them might have borrowed the map from Harry and seen the extra name sleeping in their dorm, but none of them comment on it. It's as if the map was programmed to go quiet until the plot demanded otherwise. An artifact so powerful should never be this passive. There's a scene when Snape corners Harry and confiscates the parchment, demanding an explanation. Harry refuses and Snape grows furious. Yet even with Snape holding it in his hands, the map doesn't expose its secrets. It doesn't shout warnings about Pettigrew. It doesn't reveal itself as a tool of truth. Instead, it mocks. The decision to insert humor into this moment while ignoring a potentially life-saving warning feels misaligned with the logic of the world. If the map can be snide, it can be helpful. If it can name its creators, it can name its threats. One might argue that the map only shows who is moving, but this theory collapses under scrutiny. Scabbers was frequently moving, he scampered, he was carried, he even ran away. His dot would have been visible and his name would have followed it. The map displayed everyone always, from Filch to Peeves, Dumbledore to Trevor the Toad. Every dot had a name. There is no evidence that the map selectively censored data, unless we consider that censorship was done not by the map, but by the author. This leads to a deeper question. Why didn't J.K. Rowling use the map more deliberately? Why build such a complex object only to ignore its most critical function? The answer seems clear: to preserve the surprise of Pettigrew's identity. Had Harry or Lupin or anyone else taken the map at face value, the climax of The Prisoner of Azkaban would have come crashing down. The tension in the Shrieking Shack depends entirely on Pettigrew's reappearance being a shock, but in constructing that suspense, Rowling sacrificed internal logic. In other words, the map is a plot device that works only when convenient. When Harry needs to sneak to Hogsmeade, it's flawless. When Fred and George need to avoid Filch, it's perfect. But when a supposed corpse is walking through the same corridors, riding in a student's pocket, and eating toast in the Great Hall, suddenly the map is blind. It stops being an artifact and becomes a narrative trapdoor, an object of convenience, not consistency. This inconsistency tarnishes the integrity of what should be one of the most iconic magical inventions in the series. The Marauder's map is clever, hilarious, and mysterious, but it's also selectively functional, raising the uncomfortable possibility that its silence about Peter Pettigrew was never a feature of its design, but a glitch in the storytelling, a glitch no less damaging than the betrayal it was supposed to reveal. Perhaps the most damning evidence comes not from the map itself, but from Rowling's silence on the matter. Over the years, fans have asked why the map didn't out Pettigrew earlier. No satisfying answer has ever been offered. There's no canonical explanation, just a quiet avoidance. That silence echoes the map's own failure to speak when it mattered most. And maybe that's the cruelest irony of all, because in the end, the Marauder's map didn't just fail Harry, it failed James and Lily, it failed Sirius. It allowed a traitor to fester in the heart of Hogwarts, undetected by the very thing designed by his former friends. And, for all its brilliance, all its mischief, and all its charm, the map's greatest flaw was not magical, it was narrative. Number 21, The Long-Lived Rat. In the heart of Gryffindor Tower, amidst chocolate frog wrappers and broken quills, Ron Weasley's rat lived an unusually peaceful life. Crookshanks may have snarled and hissed, Scabbers may have trembled and fled, but for nearly 12 years, the rodent clung to life with the quiet resilience of a creature that should have died long ago. Rats, by both Muggle and Wizarding standards, do not live for a decade. They hardly see their third year. And yet Scabbers persisted, greying only in stress, not in time, and never showing the decline expected of his kind. The fact that no one questioned this, not even the sharpest minds at Hogwarts, remains one of the most bizarre oversights in J.K. Rowling's intricate world. Ron had inherited Scabbers from his brother Percy, who kept him before his prefect years, which places the rat's adoption into the Weasley household well before Harry's arrival at Hogwarts. The timeline is merciless. Percy began school in 1987. By the time Harry meets Ron in 1991, Scabbers had already outlived most rats twice over. When Ron matter-of-factly tells Harry he's useless, he hardly ever wakes up, it sounds like the groaning of a preteen disappointed in a dull pet, not the concern of someone harbouring a creature years past its natural end. No alarm bells, not from Molly Weasley, not from Arthur, and certainly not from Ron himself. And yet this isn't just a normal rat. As readers later learn, Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew, an animagus who has been hiding in rat form since the fall of Lord Voldemort. His deception is thorough, even brilliant. But what's hard to swallow is how successful it is in the face of so many opportunities for exposure. Not once does anyone seem to notice that Scabbers is aging suspiciously well. Hagrid, who teaches care of magical creatures and has an affinity for animals, sees Scabbers and never once remarks on the rat's exceptional longevity. The man who can identify a Norwegian ridgeback in an egg doesn't blink at a 12-year-old rodent with no signs of frailty. The rat's behaviour, too, defies natural expectation. He's not only outliving expectations, he's surviving daily chaos in the Weasley household. Fred and George, with their love for pranks, never suspected anything. Even Ginny, who grows up around Scabbers, and whose innocence once made her vulnerable to a dark diary, never finds anything odd in the rat's unusual awareness and tendency to hide. When Scabbers bites Goyle in the first book, or goes missing only to reappear mysteriously, No one pieces together a pattern. He's a lazy rat, they all assume. Not old, not magical, certainly not a man. Rowling writes, "He's been in the family for ages," Ron tells Harry in The Philosopher's Stone. But ages in this case is disturbingly literal. Rats don't live for ages, they live for 2 or 3 years at most. That no one, including teachers, students, or even magical shopkeepers, notices this strange anomaly defies the meticulous realism Rowling is known for. She gave us a world where wizards use spells to repair broken bones, where ghosts retain their personalities for centuries, but she lets a rat live 12 years and calls it ordinary. The lapse becomes even more jarring when Crookshanks is introduced. Hermione's cat immediately senses something off about Scabbers. While Crookshanks is half nasal and perhaps more sensitive than average animals, it still suggests that magical creatures have some form of intuition about dark presences. If a cat can notice, how can Hagrid not? How can McGonagall, herself an animagus, fail to detect the magic wrapped around the rat's form? The Marauder's map shows Pettigrew walking the halls of Hogwarts, his name clear as day, and yet the people who created the map never thought to account for his transformation into a rat. The magic that binds these secrets together suddenly seems too convenient, too lenient. Even when Remus Lupin sees Scabbers in the Shrieking Shack, the truth pours out too smoothly. Lupin confirms that Pettigrew is alive without ever pausing to consider how he remained a rat for over a decade. Sirius Black, too, doesn't blink. Their concern is justified, they've found the traitor, but they miss the equally strange fact that Pettigrew's transformation has defied nature. It's one thing to hide, it's another to biologically withstand the strain of staying in animal form for so long. Did he eat? Did he age? Did magic preserve him? The books never say, and that silence feels like an unfinished spell hanging mid-air, unanswered. Some might argue that animagi don't age as animals, but there's no canon evidence to support this. McGonagall transforms into a cat regularly, but never for more than a few minutes. The only comparable case is Sirius Black, who spends years as Padfoot to escape detection, and when he emerges, he looks ragged, starved, and visibly aged. There's no indication that he avoided aging by being a dog. If anything, he's suffered for it. So why does Pettigrew seem immune? Why does he retain youthful energy when even his disguise, a rat, should have long since crumbled under time? More troubling still is the lack of suspicion from the broader wizarding world. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Pettigrew fakes his own death to frame Sirius. But even in hiding, how did he maintain his disguise so thoroughly? How did the Weasleys take him to Diagon Alley, to Egypt, and to Hogwarts without encountering anyone who said, "That's a mighty old rat you've got there"? In The Chamber of Secrets, Gilderoy Lockhart takes one look at Ron's broken wand and makes a fool of himself. But even he, egotistical and oblivious as he is, doesn't find the rat strange. The entire magical world looks at Scabbers and sees a pet, not a puzzle. And puzzles are what Rowling's world is built on. Horcruxes, time-turners, and enchanted mirrors all follow internal logic. Yet here, logic collapses under the weight of convenience. Scabbers' long life isn't explained by a spell, a potion, or a magical artifact. It's simply allowed to happen. The audience is expected to believe that this rat aged more like a tortoise than a rodent, and no one, not even Hermione Granger, who researched Polyjuice Potion at 12, raises a single doubt. Even when the truth is revealed, it doesn't fully land. Pettigrew transforms before their eyes, but no one gasps in realization and says, "That's why he lived so long." The moment is framed as a dramatic twist, not a reckoning with all the clues that were missed. It should have been a floodgate, washing away years of confusion, but instead it's treated as a single revelation. Rowling doesn't stop to tie off the loose ends. She lets them dangle, trusting the spectacle to overshadow the cracks in the foundation. It's especially strange because so much of The Prisoner of Azkaban is built on time, memory, and exposure. The Time Turner arc is all about the implications of repeating moments. The Marauder's map reveals secrets long buried, and yet the 12 years of Scaba's life are left unscrutinized. Rowling, who otherwise obsesses over small details, the pattern on a Christmas jumper, the exact flavor of Bertie Bott's beans, somehow forgets to address the central question: how did no one notice a rat that refused to die? Even the Weasleys themselves, a family steeped in magic, remain oblivious. Arthur, who works with magical creatures at the Ministry, never finds it odd that the family pet is older than most of his children. Molly, who mothers every living being in her house, never wonders why her son's rat isn't slowing down. Fred and George, who notice everything and prank anything that moves, never think to question the rat's longevity. The blind spot is so wide it borders on magical itself. There's something haunting in the way Pettigrew escapes scrutiny, not just from enemies, but from friends. He hides in plain sight and no one looks close enough. It's a cautionary tale, perhaps, about how easily evil slips by when cloaked in the mundane. But even then, the logistics remain shaky. Rowling's omission feels more like a narrative oversight than a thematic device. She builds a world so meticulously layered that when something this glaring is missed, it fractures the illusion. The spell of the Harry Potter universe is one of immersion. Readers dive into a world where the rules, though magical, are consistent. But Scabbers breaks that spell. His continued presence defies biology, common sense, and even magic's own logic. He's a rat that outlives expectations, and in doing so, exposes a rare crack in Rowling's otherwise flawless castle. Number 22. Sirius escaped. But where was the security? The escape of Sirius Black from Azkaban is described in Harry Potter, and the prisoner of Azkaban as a once-in-a-century event, a shock so severe that the entire Ministry of Magic spirals into panic. Yet, as one reads more closely, cracks begin to appear in the narrative. J.K. Rowling presents the event as a singular anomaly, but upon further scrutiny, Sirius's miraculous journey raises more questions than it answers. The man escapes a fortress guarded by soul-sucking dementors with no wand, no allies, no food, no broomstick. And yet he manages to cross the country, evade magical detection, break into Hogwarts multiple times, and even share a tent with Ron Weasley's pet rat. In any other setting, this would be hailed as a plot hole of epic proportions, a moment where the suspension of disbelief is stretched dangerously thin. Azkaban is not just a prison, it is presented as the most secure facility in the magical world, a place designed to break the human spirit. Dementors patrol the walls, the very air is thick with despair, and escape is believed to be impossible. This isn't a careless claim. Throughout the series, characters speak of Azkaban with dread. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic at the time, is so shaken by the escape that he personally visits Azkaban to confirm it. And yet what does he find? A thin, half-mad man who simply slipped through the bars in dog form and swam to shore. One has to ask, was this really all it took? An animagus? Transformation and a bit of doggy paddling? The justification Rowling offers is that Dementors cannot detect animals the same way they detect humans. Sirius, being an unregistered animagus, could transform into a large black dog and thus evade their perception. But this explanation collapses under scrutiny. If this weakness is known, why hasn't the Ministry implemented any countermeasures? Why aren't magical prisons equipped with spells or enchantments that prevent animagus transformations? Even the Marauder's map, created by Hogwarts students, could distinguish people in animagus form. Mr. Mooney presents his compliments to Professor Snape. The map saw Peter Pettigrew when no one else could. Surely the Ministry could manage something similar. The logic becomes even more questionable when one considers the aftermath of the escape. The Ministry is shown deploying Dementors throughout the country, stationing them at every corner of Hogwarts. Students are warned not to go outside alone. But with all this effort, why wasn't Sirius located immediately? Dementors are allegedly drawn to human emotion, to suffering and thought. Yet Sirius, even weakened, is still a man. He's not an animal in spirit. He thinks, he mourns, he remembers James and Lily, he obsesses over revenge. The idea that a magical creature so attuned to the soul can be fooled by a mere physical transformation seems inconsistent at best. More puzzling is the Ministry's complete reliance on Dementors rather than any of the countless magical tracking tools available in the wizarding world. Wizards can trace underage magic. They know when a child performs a spell. Wands leave unique magical signatures. The trace exists. And Sirius had been in possession of a wand before his imprisonment, even if it was confiscated. Why was there no effort to trace his magic once he escaped? Granted, he had no wand, but surely the Ministry should have assumed he might acquire one or use magic in some form. Was no effort made to detect unauthorized magic in regions where he might be hiding? Adding to this confusion is the fact that Sirius manages to not only escape but to do so with enough clarity of mind to create a long-term plan. He breaks into Hogwarts, a school protected by ancient enchantments. Not once, but multiple times. He slices the portrait of the fat lady, hides in the Gryffindor Tower, and comes face to face with Ron. And not once is he detected by the powerful, protective enchantments that supposedly shield the castle. Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, is on high alert. The teachers are watching every corner, Filch is checking doors, and yet Sirius glides in and out, unseen, unfelt. Even Harry wonders aloud how he could possibly have gotten inside. One of the strangest oversights lies in the fact that Sirius travels hundreds of miles on foot. He escapes from an island fortress in the middle of the North Sea and ends up in Hogsmeade, near Hogwarts. There's no mention of magical travel. He doesn't apparate, he doesn't use the Flu network, and he doesn't summon a broomstick. He simply runs. While this is meant to showcase his determination, it overlooks a critical logistical issue. How did he survive? He had no money, no wand, no food. How does a man starved and imprisoned for 12 years manage to survive weeks in the wild while also evading magical law enforcement? It's also unclear why the Ministry never bothers to question how he managed the escape. There is no internal investigation that we know of, no review of Azkaban's vulnerabilities, no committee formed to evaluate the threat. Fudge's reaction is mostly performative. He panics, increases Dementor patrols, and leaks the story to the Daily Prophet. But there is no intelligent follow-up. When asked how Sirius escaped, he offers vague responses. "It's never happened before," he says. "He was probably helped." But who could have helped him? The prison is in the middle of the sea, accessible only by boat, and guarded by creatures that sense all human presence. No outsider could approach without being noticed. And then there's Peter Pettigrew, the actual criminal, hiding in plain sight as Ron Weasley's pet rat. For years, he lived in the dormitory of one of the most watched children in the wizarding world. A man who faked his own death and betrayed the Potters was literally sleeping beside Harry Potter. And nobody noticed. The Ministry never even suspected. The Weasleys obtained Scabbers second-hand. A simple, magical scan could have identified his true nature. If Hogwarts had implemented any magical security, any sort of aura detection, this would have been obvious, but it seems the school trusted its legacy enchantments without ever updating them. The most glaring contradiction, however, lies in the behavior of the Dementors themselves. They are everywhere, at the gates of Hogwarts, patrolling the lake, even invading the Quidditch pitch, and yet they never find Sirius. They don't detect him, don't smell him, don't sense him. This is a man whose thoughts are entirely consumed by memories of Azkaban, of James, of revenge. His emotional turmoil should have made him a beacon, yet they float aimlessly, never catching his trail. If Dementors are truly this inept, why are they trusted as the first line of defense? In a world filled with spells like Revelio, Hominum Revelio, and Point Me, it's baffling that Sirius could go completely undetected. Aurors are trained in tracking magic, and the Ministry has a magical law enforcement squad. Why weren't they deployed with magical tools to track Sirius's movements? Why wasn't his animagus form known to anyone? Granted, he, James, and Peter had kept their transformation secret, but someone should have guessed. Remus Lupin, who knew about the marauders, remained quiet. Dumbledore, always aware of deeper truths, never revealed this fact either. Was this a convenient silence, or a forgotten detail? Even the night bus, the emergency transport system for stranded witches and wizards, is somehow missed in the equation. We learn in the book that Harry accidentally summons it. It seems entirely plausible that Sirius, cold and alone, might have done the same. And yet no one ever checks. The Ministry never tracks magical transport logs, doesn't interview bus drivers, doesn't place any magical alerts for unregistered magical movement. It's a stunning absence of operational logic. The security breach is not just in Azkaban, it extends to the entire magical justice system. If an innocent man can be imprisoned without trial, and a guilty one can live as a rat for years, and a third can escape and reach the most protected school in Britain without setting off any magical alarms, then what does that say about the reliability of magical institutions? It's no longer just a story about one man's escape. It becomes a story about systemic failure, a world so advanced in spells and potions, yet so ignorant of its own blind spots. Rowling asks us to believe that Sirius Black, mentally shattered, emaciated, and armed with nothing but fury, could outsmart an entire government, infiltrate a magically protected school, and share a room with the boy he was falsely accused of trying to kill. It makes for gripping fiction, but as logic creeps in, the spell begins to fade. The more we examine the trail, the more we see that this isn't the tale of one brilliant escape. It's the story of how everyone else simply failed to see the obvious. Number 23. Snape in the final scene, hero or random witness. In the heart of the shrieking shack, beneath the storm-tossed sky of a long and haunted night, a moment unfolded that would shape the fates of several key figures in the wizarding world. Yet, buried beneath the tension and revelations, a curious inconsistency lingers, one that has escaped the scrutiny of even the most ardent fans for years. Severus Snape, the ever-watchful, ever-brooding potions master, enters the scene in a whirlwind of fury and righteous indignation. His wand is drawn, his accusations are sharp. He bursts in with such conviction that it seems he has borne witness to every detail of the confrontation unfolding between Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and the trio of students who stumbled into a moment that rewrote history. But therein lies the problem. Snape was not awake for most of what transpired. He storms into the shrieking shack, full of certainty, declaring, "You don't know Potter as I do," and accusing Sirius of manipulating Harry. His voice is dripping with loathing, his mind seemingly overflowing with truths. He demands justice, he threatens vengeance, and then, without much fanfare, he is disarmed, quite literally, by a combined stunning spell delivered by Harry, Ron, and Hermione. He crashes to the ground in unconscious silence, no longer a participant in the scene. But when next we see him, Snape is alert, upright, and, most crucially, aware of everything that happened while he was unconscious. He acts with unshakable certainty. And that, more than anything, is the troubling inconsistency. Casts a shadow over J.K. Rowling's otherwise masterful plotting. The question lingers, how does Snape know what happened? How can a man, unconscious and bound, suddenly regain awareness and acts as if he had seen every secret laid bare before his eyes? When the group returns to Hogwarts, Snape is frothing with indignation. He insists that Sirius is guilty, that Lupin aided him, that Harry and his friends were bewitched. He even demands that Sirius be kissed by a Dementor. But that makes little sense. The evidence revealed in the shrieking shack, the true story of Peter Pettigrew, the betrayal of James and Lily, and Sirius's wrongful imprisonment, was exposed only while Snape was unconscious. He did not hear the tale, he did not witness Pettigrew's transformation. and yet he acts with total confidence in a reality he did not witness. The book itself offers no explanation for this anomaly. No spell is described that might have transferred knowledge into Snape's mind. No character pauses to ask how he knows what he claims. Not even Dumbledore, who is usually so meticulous in untangling the events of a crisis, raises a brow. It's as if the narrative simply forgets that Snape was unconscious. And more troubling still, the other characters behave as though they too have forgotten. Dumbledore merely counsels Snape not to take the matter so personally. That's it. No questions, no curiosity, no logic. This is not a minor slip of continuity. It is a gaping hole in the fabric of the story, a moment where the structure of logic bends too far. For Snape to respond the way he does, he must have had access to information that was never revealed to him. His outrage is too specific. His accusations are too focused. He is not guessing, he is asserting. "They're confounded," he cries, certain that Harry and Hermione are under a spell. "Sirius Black is a murderer," he insists, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, that the real traitor lies squirming in the form of a rat in the corner. Consider the tension of that final confrontation in the hospital wing. Snape is there, Dumbledore is there. The truth, for all who were conscious in the shack, hangs in the air. But Snape, once again, disregards it entirely. When Sirius pleads, "I'm innocent," Snape doesn't just disagree, he reacts as if he personally witnessed a deception. He speaks as though he heard nothing but lies and manipulation. But if we are to trust the narrative, he was in no position to form such conclusions. The truth is this: he missed everything. He was unconscious, then bound and silent. And so a theory begins to form. One that stretches the boundaries of canon, but feels strangely tempting. What if Snape had his own method of knowing? What if, in a hidden pocket of time, he rewound events and watched them unfold? In a world where time-turners exist, where Hermione can attend 3 classes at once without raising suspicion, is it so impossible to imagine that a teacher, especially one as secretive and resourceful as Severus Snape, might have his own way of peeking behind the veil of time? The idea is absurd, of course, it's never suggested, but the logic of the narrative almost demands it. Otherwise, we are forced to believe that Snape awoke from unconsciousness with omniscient clarity, and that surely is a greater stretch than hidden time travel. Rowling is no stranger to intricate plot mechanics. The entire 3rd book hinges on the use of the time-turner, a device so delicately woven into the climax that a single misstep could unravel the entire resolution. But while Hermione's use of the time-turner is carefully plotted and clearly explained, Snape's sudden awareness is not. His knowledge is assumed, his memory is treated as complete. And yet he was absent for the truth. He was out cold. He never heard Lupin confess his identity as a werewolf. He never saw the map's secret revealed. He never witnessed Pettigrew's trembling, whiskered form emerge from Ron's hands. What makes this oversight all the more puzzling is that Snape's character demands precision. He is not a man prone to wild assumptions. He is meticulous, cautious, calculating. For him to construct such an exact narrative, he must have evidence. But in this case, there is none. He offers no proof. He cites no facts. He simply barrels forward with accusations as though he holds a script of the events. This contradicts the very essence of his personality. If anyone would demand to know every detail before passing judgment, it would be Snape. And yet here, he abandons reason entirely. Even more frustrating is how the other characters enable this lapse. Dumbledore, wise and composed, does not press the issue. He soothes Snape's fury with vague reassurances. He tells him to let go, to trust that the truth will emerge in time. But why? Why does no one stop to say, "Severus, you were unconscious. You don't know what happened"? Why does no one point to the bound rat in the corner and demand that it be unmasked again? Why is the story allowed to proceed without this essential reckoning? It's as though the moment was too complicated to address, and so it was simply swept aside. There is a moment in the book that underscores the absurdity of Snape's certainty. When Harry later defends Sirius to Cornelius Fudge, he says, "Professor Snape told him the whole story, but he's wrong." Even Harry knows that Snape is mistaken, but the irony is deeper than that. Snape doesn't even know the whole story. He was never told. He guessed, or pretended to guess, and everyone let him. It is a curious case of narrative sleight of hand, where one character is allowed to leap over logic without anyone noticing, except, of course, readers who return to this moment with sharper eyes. The only plausible in-world explanation, weak as it is, would be that someone told Snape the entire story off-screen. But who? Lupin, who just moments before was being threatened with dismissal. Sirius, who Snape loathes and distrusts. The trio who just stunned him. No character would reasonably share these secrets with him, and certainly not in a way that would make him so confident in the opposite conclusion. He doesn't just act informed, he acts misinformed and yet with authority. It is tempting, then, to see Snape as both a tragic and comic figure in this moment. He arrives too late, learns too little, and yet speaks as if he were judge, jury, and executioner. He demands justice without context, he rages without clarity. And through it all, the narrative gives him a pass. Rowling, for all her brilliance, permits this moment to slide through the cracks, unnoticed by her characters, ignored by her plot. In the end, Snape's role in the climax of The Prisoner of Azkaban remains a blemish on an otherwise impeccable twist. He is not a witness, he is not a hero, he is not even a reliable participant. He is quite plainly unconscious for the heart of the action, and yet, when he wakes, he acts as though he knows everything. The story lets him, the characters let him, but the logic does not, and perhaps that, more than anything, is what makes this moment so frustrating. Not that Snape is wrong, but that he was never even in the room when the truth came out, and no one seems to care. Number 24, Owl Letters, only in theory? In the dim corridors of magical logic that wind through Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, there exists a peculiar oversight, one that creaks under the weight of its own convenience. It is nestled innocuously within the warmth of a letter. Sirius Black, the infamous fugitive, sends Harry a note granting permission for trips to Hogsmeade, signed, "With love," and delivered by an owl. A touching moment, yes, but one that invites an avalanche of questions. This single, sentimental gesture unravels a quiet inconsistency in J.K. Rowling's carefully constructed universe. If Sirius could send an owl to Harry, why didn't he send one much earlier? Why didn't he write to Dumbledore the moment he escaped Azkaban, explaining the truth that could have saved Harry himself and countless others from so much chaos? Sirius had nothing to lose and everything to gain. He knew Peter Pettigrew was alive. He knew the boy Harry was in danger. And he knew that only one man, Albus Dumbledore, had both the power and the authority to act decisively. Yet Sirius, an animagus capable of cunning, chooses the long, brutal path, escape, track Ron Weasley's pet rat across the countryside, sneak into Hogwarts more than once, and nearly get caught multiple times, all without attempting a single line of written defense until the story permits it. Only then, in the final chapters, does he suddenly remember that owls exist and that they can deliver a message, undetected and accurate across any magical or geographical distance. The magical owl post system, introduced as a cornerstone of wizarding communication in the Philosopher's Stone, is presented as nearly flawless. Owls are not only able to find people without a known address, but also seem to operate outside the limitations of time, security, or geography. Hagrid sends Harry's Hogwarts letter via owl. Percy receives letters from Penelope. Ron gets a howler from his mother. The Ministry uses owl post to communicate everything from office memos to court summons. In every case, the owl delivers its letter, sometimes embarrassingly, but always efficiently. So why not Sirius? The man spent 12 years brooding in Azkaban with only one thought: avenge the betrayal of James and Lily. Surely he also had time to think of telling someone, anyone, the truth. The most natural target for such a letter would have been Albus Dumbledore. As the headmaster of Hogwarts and a known supporter of Sirius's best friend James Potter, Dumbledore would have been more likely than anyone to listen. Sirius could have sent a letter from anywhere, even while on the run, and signed it with information only the Order of the Phoenix would know. He could have mentioned the secret of the Marauder's map, or that Remus Lupin is a werewolf, or that they were all unregistered animagi. These details, while dangerous, were unique. No Death Eater could have fabricated them. The letter would have reached Dumbledore's hands, and even if it was intercepted, what real risk did Sirius face that was worse than what he was already enduring? The counter-argument often mentioned is that Sirius feared interception. Perhaps, the logic goes, his letters might fall into Ministry hands, and he would be recaptured. But this falters under scrutiny. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius sends a letter to Harry via Owl, and it arrives unharmed, unopened, and untracked. The Owl finds Harry, despite Sirius being on the run, and without access to Hogwarts' internal mailing system. This means that owls are not routinely intercepted, nor do they trigger alerts at the Ministry, even when the sender is the most wanted wizard in Britain. The system clearly operates on magical protections that preserve privacy, and Sirius seems confident enough in this when he sends Harry a message with his godfatherly blessing. Rowling's own rules betray her in this moment. In the Chamber of Secrets, a simple letter from Ron to Harry results in an enchanted car smashing through the bars on a window. In the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius communicates with Harry frequently through letters and fire calls. Even in the Goblet of Fire, owls travel in and out of Hogwarts every day without suspicion. For Sirius to go 12 years without attempting a single message to anyone, not Remus Lupin, not Molly, and Arthur Weasley, not even the Daily Prophet, is absurd. His silence only serves the plot, not the character. It keeps Harry in suspense. It maintains Sirius's shadowy mystique, but it also ignores the tools Rowling herself gave him. The letter Sirius finally sends is itself an act of plot convenience. Delivered after all has been revealed, it arrives in the safety of the hospital wing, granting Harry the parental approval needed to continue his school year without interruption. The content of the letter is charming. Sirius writes, "I thought your friend Ron might like to keep this owl, as it's my fault he no longer has a rat." The owl, small and hyperactive, becomes Pigwidgeon, a new gift from a man who, moments earlier, had been hiding in caves, living off rats. Suddenly he is not only capable of writing letters, but also sending animals through the post. The leap from fugitive to thoughtful gift-giver occurs without any narrative explanation of how Sirius acquired the means, or why he hadn't used them before. In retrospect, the owl post is perhaps the most underestimated plot device in the entire series. It works when the story demands it and vanishes when it would solve too many problems. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore receives messages through forks, or magical means far more complex than owls, yet the average witch or wizard relies on birds. Even Death Eaters communicate via enchanted messages and Patronus forms. But Sirius? The man content to transform into a dog and sleep on the cold stone floor of the Shrieking Shack with no attempt to explain himself to the world? He never writes a letter, not until the plot resolves itself. The problem isn't that Sirius failed to write earlier, it's that Rowling gave him every possible reason to and then retroactively showed he could have, without danger. In doing so, she undermined the stakes she so carefully built. The reader is left wondering why this clever, brave man, who once risked everything for friendship and truth, would sit in silence while his godson suffered. It's not in his nature. The Sirius Black who faced down Severus Snape in the name of loyalty, who laughed at death in the Department of Mysteries, would not let words be unsaid if he had the chance to speak. If Sirius had written a letter the moment he escaped, the entire narrative would shift. Dumbledore would have been alerted. Harry might never have suspected Lupin. The Marauder's map might never have been confiscated. And most importantly, Peter Pettigrew, the true traitor, might have been unmasked months earlier before fleeing to rejoin Voldemort. All of these events hinge on Sirius staying silent, not because he had to, but because the story needed him to. Rowling, in her brilliance, sometimes prioritized the structure of her mystery over the logic of her world. To be fair, the emotional payoff of Sirius's late arrival is enormous. His hug with Harry, their shared glances of unspoken understanding, and the idea of Harry finally having family are powerful. But these emotions are shaded by the nagging logic that they could have arrived so much sooner. Sirius's choice to wait until the narrative's climax to speak, even through ink and parchment, robs the character of his full agency. He becomes a piece on the chessboard, moving when the author allows, silenced when inconvenient. One could even argue that Sirius's late letter sends a dangerous message that it's better to act dramatically than wisely. His silence, justified as caution, nearly results in the death of Ron, the collapse of Lupin's fragile trust, and the ongoing torment of Harry. Had he simply sent a letter to Dumbledore upon escape, bearing a truth charm or even a blood sigil for authenticity, the entire tragedy might have been averted. But then there would be no third act twist, no shrieking shack confrontation, no last-minute revelations. The narrative demands silence, so Sirius obliges. The moment we realize Sirius had access to Owlpost all along, that he could have used it at any point safely and effectively, the scaffolding of suspense starts to shake. Rowling's genius lies in making us forget this while we read. But once the curtain falls, the illusion flickers. The wizarding world, for all its charms, begins to show cracks, not in its magic, but in its narrative convenience. The owl, that silent, efficient messenger of secrets and truth, becomes the very symbol of a story's compromise. And Sirius, the man who could have changed everything with one letter, instead becomes the embodiment of what goes unsaid. Number 25, trap on the passage to the shrieking shack. What trap? In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, J.K. Rowling constructs one of the most atmospheric and emotionally resonant scenes in the entire series. The Whomping Willow, the Shrieking Shack, Sirius Black's revelation, and the reunion with Peter Pettigrew all culminate in a sequence that reshapes Harry's understanding of his past. But nestled within this powerful narrative is a baffling oversight, one so strange that it raises the question, did the entire magical faculty at Hogwarts forget how to set a magical alarm? Ron Weasley is dragged into a supposedly sealed and secret passageway that leads directly from the Hogwarts grounds to the most haunted house in Britain, the Shrieking Shack. The tunnel lies beneath the violent branches of the Whomping Willow, a tree notorious for smashing anything that dares approach it. Yet Sirius Black, in dog form, has somehow navigated this path, pulled Ron through it, and waited in the decaying building for Harry and Hermione to follow. After the climactic scene and eventual exoneration of Sirius in the eyes of a few, no one mentions securing that passage ever again. Not even once. This is no minor oversight. As Remus Lupin himself states, there is a tunnel under the Whomping Willow that leads to the Shrieking Shack, and it is implied throughout the book that almost no one knows about it, save for those intimately familiar with the Marauders' history. The tree was planted specifically to conceal the entrance and to protect students from the werewolf hiding inside. But once Harry, Ron, and Hermione discover the route, and once Sirius uses it to bypass all magical protection of Hogwarts, the secrecy is shattered, and yet not a single protective measure is taken. Let's make this clear. Sirius Black, the most wanted wizard in the magical world at that moment, bypasses the castle's protective enchantments by crawling through a tunnel in the ground. And this tunnel is not sealed afterward. No wards, no magical barriers, no guards. not even a mildly annoyed professor with a stopwatch. The ministry had deployed Dementors to float along the perimeters of the school, yet the staff at Hogwarts apparently forgot to check the ground beneath their feet. Even if one assumed that Sirius was an exception, an animagus uniquely capable of navigating this path, it still doesn't explain why such an obvious security risk is left wide open. The Shrieking Shack is in Hogsmeade, and Hogsmeade is not protected by the same ancient spells that surround Hogwarts. Voldemort's supporters, many of whom would later infiltrate every corner of the wizarding world, could easily exploit such a passage. The Death Eaters could have strolled into the shack, dropped into the tunnel, and emerged just outside the castle's walls. Let's not forget that this tunnel was used by Lupin for years as a child to hide during full moons. It was structurally sound enough to accommodate a werewolf. It was certainly good enough for a human being. Even Crookshanks managed to press the knot on the willow to disable its attacks. So why was nothing done? Why did Dumbledore, who knew every inch of the grounds, not see the potential for disaster? Dumbledore himself had seen the chaos unfold that night. He knew Sirius had entered through the willow. He knew the tunnel still worked, yet in the Goblet of Fire, the Order of the Phoenix, and even the Half-Blood Prince, the tunnel is never mentioned again. Not a single line suggests it was sealed. Not a whisper indicates someone even thought of it again. Meanwhile, the magical world faced rising threats, Death Eaters returned to power, and Hogwarts became a primary target for infiltration. When Harry uses the Marauders map in The Order of the Phoenix, he can see every moving figure inside the castle and grounds. If that map were to fall into the wrong hands, as it nearly does multiple times, the tunnel would once again be exposed. The map even shows secret passages. It's 7 in all, as Fred and George Weasley explain. Some of them are caved in, some are sealed, but not the one under the willow. The most dangerous one of all is left untouched. This problem isn't just about one tunnel, it's about a total disregard for security logic in a world where the stakes are life and death. Hogwarts is frequently described as the most secure place after Gringotts, but a tunnel that starts in an unguarded house in Hogsmeade and ends just outside the castle walls breaks that illusion. It mocks it. For a series that so often revels in layered world-building, this omission feels like a house built on sand. In The Half-Blood Prince, Death Eaters enter Hogwarts through another hidden passage, the Vanishing Cabinet. That breach results in Dumbledore's death. Afterward, the school tightens its protections, but by then the damage is done. And yet still no one mentions the Whomping Willow tunnel. Did the entire Board of Governors forget it existed? Did McGonagall, now headmistress, simply decide it was a non-issue? It's as if the entire wizarding world went selectively blind. The Whomping Willow was violent, yes, but not omniscient. All it took was a simple press to the knot on its trunk and it froze in place. This detail is revealed in Prisoner of Azkaban when Crookshanks, a cat, manages to do it. If a clever feline could shut down the tree's defense system, surely a determined Death Eater could do the same, or a house elf, or anyone with the right information and minimal magical skill. This leads us to a deeper, more unsettling question. How many other forgotten tunnels or spells or objects lie around the castle with the same level of exposure? If one passage was so easily overlooked, what else might exist waiting to be exploited? The story of the Deathly Hallows is built on the premise that ancient magic leaves behind dangerous artifacts. But here we have very modern failure, human negligence. Consider also the Ministry's role. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the Ministry is fully engaged in the hunt for Sirius Black. Cornelius Fudge visits Hogwarts multiple times. Dementors surround the school. And yet, with all this fanfare, no one bothers to inspect how the escaped convict entered the castle. It's like launching a national manhunt without checking if the back door is open. Fudge was certainly not above micromanaging school affairs, as seen in The Order of the Phoenix. But when the threat is real, the response is theatre. Perhaps the most tragic irony of all is that Harry and his friends never mention the tunnel again either. They use secret paths to sneak into Hogsmeade. They know the importance of hidden routes. But this particular tunnel, which once brought them face to face with betrayal and potential death, becomes irrelevant. Why? Because the plot moved on, the character arcs evolved. But the danger remained buried in the earth, waiting for someone else to find it. If Voldemort had known about this tunnel, the Battle of Hogwarts might have played out very differently. He wouldn't have needed to break down the front gates. He could have sent his forces through the tunnel while the Order stood on the battlements. A few well-placed curses from within the school walls could have turned the tide before the defenders even knew the fight had begun. Rowling's world is rich with hidden details and intricate logic. But this oversight feels less like a mystery and more like a forgotten thread. The Whomping Willow was planted to protect a secret. That secret is exposed, and yet the protection is never updated. It's like discovering a dragon in your basement and deciding to just close the door quietly and hope it stays asleep. The Shrieking Shack remains, through all 7 books, a symbol of haunted isolation. But it also becomes, unintentionally, a symbol of magical negligence. In a world where a curse can last for centuries, where ancient bloodlines protect vaults and homes, and where even portraits enforce security, it is unfathomable that one of the most direct vulnerabilities in the castle's defences was never patched. Perhaps Rowling trusted that readers would focus more on the emotional weight of the Marauders' past and the friendship rekindled between Sirius and Harry. Perhaps she never expected the fan base to analyse every corner of the grounds, but that is exactly what makes this lapse so glaring, because once you see the hole in the wall, you can't unsee it, and once you know there's a tunnel into Hogwarts unguarded waiting, you can't help but wonder, was Voldemort just not paying attention, or was the author? Number 26. Where did Ron get a rat cage on the train? In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the atmosphere inside the Hogwarts Express begins to shift as early tensions set the tone for a darker, more serious school year. Among these tensions is a curious, overlooked moment involving Ron Weasley, his pet rat, Scabbers, and a mouse cage that appears almost out of nowhere. It's a moment that upon close inspection reveals not just a continuity issue but a significant inconsistency that seems to contradict the very essence of Ron's character and his family's financial struggles. When Crookshanks, Hermione's large and perceptive cat, attacks Scabbers during their journey on the train, Ron scrambles to protect his pet and manages to produce a cage, suddenly and conveniently, to secure the frightened rat. But where did this cage come from? Earlier in the same book, Ron is described as treating Scabbers with a degree of negligence that, while not cruel, suggests indifference. In the first chapters, Scabbers is often mentioned as being in Ron's pocket or loosely carried around. He's not described as being kept in any container or cage, nor is there any suggestion that Ron even owned such an item. This might seem trivial, but in the wizarding world, where even minor details carry weight, it stands out. Ron had Scabbers since his first year at Hogwarts, and throughout the first 2 books there is no mention of a cage being used for his rat, not during the train rides, not in the dormitories, and not at home in the burrow. The Weasleys are established as a poor family, living modestly and often improvising when it comes to school supplies and magical items. In the Philosopher's Stone, Ron borrows robes, uses a hand-me-down wand, and brings a rat that once belonged to his older brother, Percy. Even in the Chamber of Secrets, his family travels by flying car because they can't afford better alternatives, and his wand is broken due to lack of funds to replace it. The narrative repeatedly emphasizes their frugality, so why would Ron suddenly have a cage for Scabbers that he never cared to use before? J.K. Rowling clearly sets up Scabbers as a neglected pet. In the Philosopher's Stone, Scabbers is described as small and very dirty, and Ron admits that he doesn't do much. Fred and George even try to turn him yellow with a spell, which suggests a shared view of Scabbers as more of a joke than a cherished companion. Ron never expresses concern for the rat's comfort, nor does he act as though Scabbers needs protection. This is consistent through 2 entire books. Then, on the train to Hogwarts in Prisoner of Azkaban, a sudden shift occurs. Crookshanks lunges at Scabbers, and Ron responds with an unexpected display of responsibility by whipping out a cage to shield his pet. It's a strange moment, not just because of the sudden concern, but because of the sudden existence of the cage itself. The scene reads, Ron, reached into his trunk, pulled out a battered-looking cage and shoved Scabbers inside, slamming the door shut as Crookshanks leapt again. This is the first mention in the entire series of Ron owning a cage for Scabbers, and it's jarring in context. There had been no prior indication that he brought such an item with him to school, let alone that he ever owned one. If Ron truly cared enough to bring a cage, why was Scabbers still being carried around in a pocket for the rest of the summer? Why didn't he use the cage earlier when Scabbers was clearly distressed or missing tufts of fur, as described in the early chapters? Adding to the strangeness is the fact that Scabbers, as readers later discover, is not a real rat at all, but Peter Pettigrew in his animagus form. This revelation casts a long shadow over the entire narrative, retroactively raising the stakes of Scabbers' presence. Knowing this, the appearance of the cage becomes even more suspect. It conveniently allows Scabbers to be hidden from Crookshanks, who in turn seems to sense Pettigrew's true identity. The cage becomes not just a prop but a plot device, appearing precisely when the story needs it and vanishing when it does not. This is where the problem deepens. In a well-constructed narrative, especially one as meticulously plotted as the Harry Potter series claims to be, objects do not just appear out of nowhere. Rowling is known for her intricate foreshadowing and careful layering of magical rules and relationships. The Time Turner, the Marauder's Map, the Invisibility Cloak. All these items are introduced with context, meaning, and rules. A cage for a rat, on the other hand, shouldn't have needed such complex groundwork, but its absence from prior books and its sudden presence now disrupts the internal logic of the world. Even more frustrating is that the cage is never mentioned again. Once Ron uses it in this one moment on the train, it disappears from the narrative. At no point in the rest of Prisoner of Azkaban does the cage serve a role. Scabbers continues to be described as hiding in Ron's pocket or under bedsheets. If the cage truly existed, and Ron was finally being protective, wouldn't he use it regularly to keep the rats safe from Crookshanks? But no. The cage, like a prop pulled from a magician's sleeve, vanishes without trace. It's hard not to see this as a rare but clear narrative misstep on Rowling's part. She needed a way to insert tension between Hermione and Ron, a recurring thread in Prisoner of Azkaban, and Crookshanks' attack on Scabbers serves that purpose well. But to stage the scene realistically, Ron needed a way to protect the rat, and so a cage was inserted into the moment without setup or follow-through. For readers who value consistency, this feels like a betrayal of the world building. Rowling asks readers to suspend disbelief for magic, but not for laziness in storytelling. The cage's sudden existence contradicts Ron's characterization too. If he had always been a doting pet owner, bringing a cage would make sense. But Ron, for all his loyalty and bravery, is not attentive when it comes to Scabbers. He forgets the rat during trips, complains when he loses him, and even scoffs at the idea that Scabbers is worth worrying about. So for him to act with sudden concern, reaching into a trunk to retrieve a cage in a moment of urgency, feels artificial. It reads as the author guiding the character rather than the character acting naturally. This also undermines the subtle tension Rowling builds between Ron and Hermione over the course of the book. Their growing distance due to differing loyalties, Ron to his longtime pet, Hermione to her new cat, is a clever thread. But introducing a cage at this point simplifies the conflict. It gives Ron a defensive tool he never had before, and in doing so it absolves him of the kind of negligence that would have made the argument more complex and authentic. Moreover, the cage undermines Crookshanks as a character. Rowling emphasizes throughout the book that Crookshanks is unusually intelligent and has a mysterious ability to detect Pettigrew's animagus form, but by confining Scabbers in a cage, the tension is diffused. Crookshanks becomes a typical pet chasing a rodent, rather than a magical creature sensing a dark presence. The scene becomes less about the hidden identity of a murderer and more about an angry cat attacking a pet rat. This moment could have been handled more subtly. If Ron had grabbed a scarf or a bag, wrapped Scabbers in it, and shouted at Hermione for letting Crookshanks loose, the scene would have retained its chaos without introducing new, inconsistent objects. It would also have stayed true to Ron's character, impulsive, fiercely loyal, but rarely prepared. The cage removes that authenticity. The oversight becomes especially glaring when we consider that Rowling had years to plan the third book and revise it thoroughly. She is known for her complex plotting and world-building, and Prisoner of Azkaban is one of the most critically acclaimed books in the series, largely due to its time travel elements and layered mysteries. That such a simple inconsistency slipped through, and in such a key, emotional moment, suggests either a rare lapse in attention or a decision to prioritize the plot over character consistency. For all the magic and wonder of the wizarding world, it's these small human errors that make readers pause. A cage that appears when needed and disappears when it's not. It might seem minor, but it chips away at the trust between reader and author. And for a series built on the idea that every detail matters, that kind of inconsistency becomes difficult to ignore. Number 27. Who knocked on the window at the beginning of the book? The night on Privet Drive was cloaked in darkness when Harry Potter sat in his bedroom, surrounded by textbooks and parchment, trying desperately to finish his summer homework by wand light. The Dursleys had been more unbearable than ever, and his only refuge was the small sanctuary of his upstairs room. In this moment of quiet desperation, a sound broke the stillness. A sharp, deliberate tap against the glass of his window. It wasn't the soft fluttering of wings or the accidental brushing of tree branches. It was rhythmic, insistent, and intentional. Harry froze. He turned toward the window and pulled back the curtain. What he saw next was a dark, hulking silhouette in the bushes. An enormous black dog, gleaming eyes catching the moonlight, watched him from the shadows. It was the Grim. Or so Harry believed. But something doesn't quite add up. According to Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, this sequence unfolds very early in the story. The quote reads, "He had been looking out of the window for 10 minutes when something very peculiar happened. A cat appeared in the street. It was crouching in the shadow of a hedge. Harry watched it with narrowed eyes. Then, just as he was thinking it looked strangely familiar, there was a knock on the window behind him. Yet what comes next is not an owl, not a letter, not even an actual visitor. Harry turns, looks out, and spots that same black dog watching him from the garden. But wait, if the knock was on the window behind him and the dog was in the bushes, what knocked?" This scene, brief and atmospheric, might easily escape a casual reader. But when read with a critical eye, it becomes clear that something is off. Sirius Black, having escaped from Azkaban, is known to be in his animagus form, a large black dog, when he arrives in Little Whinging. He does not possess a wand, nor does he have any magical means of contacting Harry directly. The books make it clear that Sirius stays hidden, careful to avoid detection from the Ministry and the Dementors. So how could he, as a dog, reach Harry's second-story window and knock? Harry's window is located on the upper floor of number 4 Privet Drive. The Dursleys live in a typical British suburban home, 2 stories tall with no ledge or tree branch conveniently placed for an animal to climb. The Grim, or rather Sirius, is explicitly described as crouching in the garden. He's watching, lurking, but the tapping, it's something else. If it was meant to be atmospheric to unsettle the reader, it succeeds brilliantly, but narratively it leaves a puzzle unsolved. What made the noise? It couldn't have been Hedwig because she was locked in her cage at the time, nor was it an owl bringing post where there is no mention of feathers, wings, or scrolls. Harry's reaction is also telling. He's not startled by the sound itself. He doesn't seem to find it supernatural or strange. He simply responds, almost mechanically, as if knocks at his window are routine. But this particular knock is out of place. It stands alone, unexplained, before the vision of the black dog enters the frame. The troubling part is how Rowling glosses over the cause. There's no follow-up explanation in later chapters. Sirius doesn't mention trying to contact Harry. There's no magical object later revealed to have been in the room. Nothing comes back to this moment. The knock remains suspended in mystery, a leftover artifact of a scene that seems to have been edited for drama but not for logic. And for an author known for her intricate plot weaving, such an omission feels jarring. Some fans have speculated that the knock could have been made by Sirius himself, perhaps scratching at the wall or lightly tapping with a paw. But this raises further questions. How would a dog, no matter how large, reach the glass on the second floor? Even if Sirius tried to climb something or stand on hind legs, it defies plausibility without assistance. And even if he could somehow leap or balance, which sounds like something out of a circus rather than a stealth mission, why wouldn't Harry be alarmed by such a feat? Why wouldn't he remark on how a dog knocked on his window? The scene serves a very clear narrative purpose. It plants the seed of the grim in Harry's mind, preparing the reader for the ominous signs and symbolism to come, but it does so by bending the internal logic of the story. It sacrifices consistency for mood, and that's where the reader stumbles, because in a world where magic has rules, where animagi are rare and hunted, where Sirius Black is a fugitive avoiding detection, this choice feels hollow. It's not the only time Prisoner of Azkaban plays with ambiguity for effect. The time-turner subplot later in the book presents its own paradoxes, but those are at least partially addressed with magical explanations. Here, there's none. Just a knock, a physical, mundane sound, but with no magical justification. It's not abstract or dreamlike, it's not internal or imagined, it's described with realism, and yet has no realistic origin. The moment is even more perplexing when contrasted with Sirius's behavior throughout the rest of the book. He is cautious, secretive, and desperate not to be seen. He follows Harry's movements from afar, hidden in the shadows. He only makes direct contact once in the Shrieking Shack, after months of evasion. Why, then, would he suddenly and uncharacteristically try to make contact or draw attention at Harry's home, especially knowing that the Ministry was watching? If the knock was meant as a foreshadowing device, it should have had a later payoff. Perhaps a conversation where Sirius confesses that he had been there, that he had tried to signal Harry, and failed. But Rowling never circles back. The dog in the bushes becomes the focus, and the knock is forgotten. It vanishes like a dropped thread in an otherwise tightly woven tapestry.